All right, Professor John Mearsheimer has been a guest on this show several times. He is a political scientist at the University of Chicago. He's the author of the 2006 book, The Israel Lobby. He has a new article out just this week on his Substack, which I highly recommend, that we're going to discuss with him, among other things, that is called The Genocide in Gaza, which analyzes the formal complaint filed by the country of South Africa against Israel at the International Court of Justice. We're going to talk to him about the war itself, the risk of escalation, what's taking place in Ukraine, where there still is a war, even though people seem not to want to talk about it and have forgotten about it, and several other related issues as well. It's always a pleasure to have him on the program. Professor Mearsheimer, good evening, and thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us again. It's great to see you.
It's great to see you, Glenn. I'm glad to be here.
Absolutely. So let's start with that article that I referenced. I want to obviously talk about the article where you express your own views on the complaint filed by South Africa and the allegations that it asserts and the documents and evidence it marshals to substantiate it. But before we get to your views on that, tell us what we need to know about this complaint, the context that led up to it, and exactly what it is that it alleges.
Well, I think there's sort of three important dimensions here. First of all, it's necessary to show intention. In other words, the South African lawyers understood that they had to provide evidence that Israel had the intent to commit genocide. Second, you have to show evidence of destruction and death inside of Gaza that reflects an effort to either destroy the Palestinian population as a whole or to destroy a substantial part of it. So there's the intention plus the action. And then the third thing is context. And what the report does is it shows that although Israel has not engaged in genocide before with regard to Gaza, there's no question that Israel has pursued for a very long time really brutal policies towards the Gazan Palestinians. And therefore, although this is a more extreme form of behavior on the part of the Israelis, it's not that unusual, not that special, given what's happened before. So those are the three key dimensions at play here, in my opinion.
So I've been a vocal and I would say unflinching critic of Israeli behavior in general with regard to the Palestinians long before October 7th, starting on October 8th. I knew what the Israelis were going to do because they were pretty clear in saying exactly what they intended to do in Gaza. Netanyahu said on the night of October 7th, the morning of October 8th, we're going to extract a price in Gaza unlike anything we've previously done there. Israeli officials have been making statements even before October 7th, certainly after, that show a different face of an Israeli government that has become more extreme. We talked about that the last time you were on my show in late October of last year. I nonetheless have been a little bit reluctant, and I know you talked about in your article that you had to use the word genocide to describe what the Israelis are doing in Gaza, notwithstanding the fact that it's easy to say that it's morally horrific and extraordinarily excessive, and to me at least seems like a sociopathic indifference to civilian life at the very least. Simply because, at least for me, the term genocide is a lot like other terms that we use in our political vernacular, like terrorism or hate speech or disinformation, that seems to me almost more ill-defined than it is concretely defined. Do you have that concern about the term genocide, that it seems a little bit ambiguous and vague in its definition? And if not, what is your understanding of exactly what someone has to do, a country has to do, to go from simply killing a lot of civilians intentionally or recklessly and then spills over into genocide? Like, what is that line for you and for the definition?
Yeah, I agree with everything that you said. And as you pointed out in the Substack piece that I wrote, I said that up until the truce ended, the truce between the Palestinians and the Israelis on November 30th, I refrained from referring to what was going on as a genocide. I think from the very beginning, you could make the argument that there was genocidal intent there. And a number of historians of the Holocaust made that point very clearly, that if you were listening to what the Israelis were saying very early in the war, it was genocidal intent. But if you looked at what they were actually doing, I found it anyway hard to make the argument before December 1st that the Israelis were aiming to destroy, and here I'm choosing my words carefully here, and I'm reflecting what's in the South African document, a substantial portion of the Palestinian population in Gaza. If you look at the number of people that were killed up through November 30th and what the Israelis had done, you could make a case, had they not gone back on a rampage starting on December 1st, that yes, what they were doing was horrific, but it didn't qualify as a genocide. But actually, if you look at what they did after November 30th, starting on December 1st, they actually ramped up the offensive campaign. And I think if you look at the situation as it's described in the South African document, it's very clear that they are intent on killing a substantial portion of the Palestinian population in Gaza. And that, I believe, qualifies as genocide.
So just to push on that a little bit, and not even because it's my view, but because it's a view that I know people who disagree with the application of this term would invoke, and I want to hear your view on it, which is that, look, if the Israelis really intended, if their intent were really to kill as many Palestinians as possible, just to kill them for the sake of erasing them from the land, the Israelis have one of the mightiest militaries in the world. They have a capability to kill a lot more Palestinians than they thus far have killed. I think the official count now is up to something like 23,000, even if you assume, as I do, that that's probably an undercount because of how many people are buried under the rubble. Let's say it's 30%, 30,000. Talking about 1.5% of the population, it's just an unimaginable number. But still, if the Israelis had a genocidal intent, that number could be 100,000 or 200,000 in terms of just their military capability. What is your response to that?
Well, first of all, if you look at past genocides, it's not like all of a sudden there's an on switch and the state goes from doing hardly anything against a rival civilian population and then all of a sudden goes on a genocidal rampage. If you look at the Holocaust, for example, it happened rather gradually. The Germans moved into the Holocaust rather gradually over the course of 1941. And I think what a lot of people see here is a gradual evolution, that the Israelis, started off thinking they could probably ethnically cleanse Gaza without having to kill that many Palestinians. But the ethnic cleansing hasn't worked, and the Israelis have decided to double down and continue to bomb Gaza and to continue to cut off, in large part, the supply of food and medicine and gasoline into Gaza. Now, what this means is that there is a huge danger that many Palestinians will die of hunger or disease in the months ahead. And that's why people think that this number of about 22,000 dead Palestinians is going to really increase greatly over the course of the next few months, if not the rest of 2024. The Israelis are making it clear that this war is going to go on for a long time. And if you look at the desperate straits that the Palestinians are in, and you think about the medical situation and the food situation, many, many more thousands of Palestinians are going to die. And this is what causes people to think that a genocide is in train. In other words, it's not like all of a sudden you go from a situation where there's no bombing to where you wipe out the Palestinian population the next day, right? Nobody would argue that that's what's happening here. It's much more evolutionary in nature. Lots of people have already been killed, and the conditions are in place for a lot more people to die. And the Israelis show no interest in backing off. And their American supporters, and here we're talking mainly about the Biden administration, have been doing remarkably little to get the Israelis to back off.
Well, that is a good segue into the question I wanted to ask, which is, if we're talking about a valid case of war crimes, and the interesting thing about this document, as you point out, is that it doesn't read like a rhetorically unhinged document. In fact, the opposite is true. It's incredibly well grounded in easily documentable facts, because a lot of it relies on the statements of Israeli government officials about what their intent is. You don't have to infer things. You just can quote some of the most important Israeli officials about what they think they're doing in the war, which in many respects is at odds with what the West believes this war is about and was told this war about, which is to destroy Hamas. But leaving that aside for the minute, what are the implications for the United States if a very credible case of war criminality and genocide has been presented at this court, given that the United States isn't just a supporter in words of what the Israelis are doing, but is the party that is providing most of the financing and most of the weapons to enable it to happen?
Well, there's no question that the United States is complicit. The Biden administration is joined at the hip with the Netanyahu government. President Biden makes no bones about that. And we have been fully supporting Israel in this war. And we've been doing that economically, militarily, and diplomatically. And there's no evidence that's going to change. And if you look at the Geneva Convention of 1948, it's quite clear that if you're complicitous in a genocide, that you are guilty along with the party that is perpetrating the genocide. So this has huge consequences for the United States. And it's why I would expect both Israel and the United States to work overtime in the days, if not weeks ahead, to quash this case.
When you were on my show I think it was the very last date of October, so October, November was the general time frame, we had talked about the Israeli motives in what it is that they were doing. And of course, the claim that we were given, the purpose of this attack was that they were going to destroy Hamas, the party responsible for the attack on October 7th inside Israel that killed several hundred Israeli civilians, I think is a fair way of putting that now in terms of what we know for sure. At the same time, though, the explicit position of many key Israeli officials before October 7th, as part of Netanyahu's government, was that Gaza does not belong to the Palestinians. Gaza belongs to the Israelis. It is part of Greater Israel, as ordained by God, as ordained by international law. That territory belongs to us, and we should expel the Palestinians from there, either in full or in large part, so that we then become the majority in that land. And it seemed to me from the beginning that that was their goal, to ethnically cleanse Gaza, either of all Arabs or enough so that the Israelis are the majority. Do you think that what you're now saying is the Israeli intention, which is to kill Palestinians in huge number on purpose, is a tactic or a method for clearing out Gaza of Palestinians? Or do you think that it's just a kind of desire, sort of like Hitler had with respect to Jews, that the world would be better off if these people didn't exist?
Let me just say, Glenn, that I think before October 7th, there was no question that most Israelis, certainly on the right and in the center, understood that ethnically cleansing both the West Bank and Gaza would be good for Israel, because Israel has a major problem, and that is that it is an apartheid state. You can read the reports by Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International, and B'Tselem, which is the most prestigious and largest human rights group inside Israel. And they have all written lengthy reports that make the case that Israel is an apartheid state. And I think most Israelis think that this is untenable over the long term. And they believe.
Can I just
that the
interrupt?
best-
Can I just interject there, so for people who hear that, just explain what you mean by that. What is an apartheid state, and why is it a phrase that accurately describes the situation in Israel and Palestine?
Well, I think an apartheid state, in very simple terms, is one where the dominant group treats the subjugated group in a cruel manner, and I'm choosing my words carefully here, in a cruel manner over an extended period of time. And if you look at how the Israelis have treated the Palestinians in the West Bank and in Gaza since 1967, when Israel acquired those territories, I think there's no question that they have treated the Palestinians cruelly, and it's been certainly for a long period of time. Now, these reports go into great detail to make the case that Israel is an apartheid state, because this is, much like the term genocide, not a term that you want to throw around in a cavalier way. And Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International, and B'Tselem fully understand it. And that's why they provide thoroughly documented reports that explain why they have concluded that Israel is an apartheid state. And by the way, I'd say that this is analogous to the document that South Africa provided to the International Court of Justice. The South Africans are fully aware that they can't make the cavalier charge, or a cavalier charge, that says that Israel is guilty of genocide. They fully understood that they had to thoroughly document their case. And if you look at their document, this is the South African document, it is truly impressive in terms of how clearly it is written, how clear the argument is, and how much documentation they provide. And the same thing is true with these reports that make the case that Israel is an apartheid state.
Well, and I think, I guess the point I'm getting at here too is, one of the things that characterized the apartheid state of South Africa in the 1980s was that the white dominant faction was the minority and were ruling over the majority of citizens who are black. So it wasn't just that one group was subjugating the other, it was that the minority group was wielding power and the majority of the people had little to none. When you look at Israel and Palestine and what the whole region that you can call from the river to the sea that both the Israelis and the Palestinians use, what is concerning, I think, a lot of even Israeli officials, and right before October 7th, in September, actually, the former head of the Mossad said that Israel is now becoming an apartheid state, is the reality that's almost here and that is going to be here very soon, if you look at demographic trends, that there will be more Arabs in what is now considered Israel, the West Bank, and Gaza very shortly, if we're not already there, than there are Jews. And that's when it becomes untenable, when the minority of people who are Jews will be ruling over the majority who are Arabs. Do you think that the desire to ethnically cleanse Gazans, to either kill enough of them or drive enough of them out, is due in part to the desire to ensure that Jews remain a majority in that land so that people can't accuse it of being an apartheid power in the sense that South Africa was?
Absolutely. And I, just to go back to where I was a few minutes ago, I think that most Israelis in the center and on the right, for sure, were interested in ethnically cleansing the West Bank and Gaza for the reasons that you laid out. But it was hard to imagine doing that before October 7th. So the Israelis settled with this mantra that what they were going to do was manage the problem. And they thought they were managing the problem quite well. The Palestinians in Gaza were not causing them major trouble. Every few years, they would go in and mow the lawn, as they put it, by bombing the place. They had things pretty much under control in the West Bank because Mahmoud Abbas was doing a lot of their dirty work. And furthermore, the Trump administration had started these Abraham Accords, which facilitated good relations between Israel and a handful of countries in the Arab world. And then the Biden administration was actually working to create an Abraham Accord between Saudi Arabia and Israel, which was really the big enchilada. And all of this meant, in the Israelis' mind, that they had the Palestinian problem under control. And therefore, people were not thinking about ethnic cleansing. But what, of course, happens on October 7th is this all blows up in the Israelis' face. And it's quite clear, just given what happened on October 7th, that they have failed to manage the problem. But furthermore, once this war starts out, you begin to see an opportunity for ethnic cleansing, because you want to remember that the two great past cases of ethnic cleansing in Greater Israel involved what happened in 1948 in the context of a war, and what happened in 1967 on the West Bank, again in the context of a war. So the Israelis saw this as an opportunity to do the ethnic cleansing and solve the apartheid problem. And I believe that that is the principal reason they went after the civilian population at the start of the war. Remember, at the start of the war, there were sort of two dimensions to Israeli policy. One was going after Hamas. The other was punishing in a really severe way the civilian population. And I believe that latter strategy, or that latter tactic, whatever you want to call it, was designed to drive out the Palestinians.
Thanks for watching this clip from System Update, our live show that airs every Monday through Friday at 7 p.m. Eastern exclusively on Rumble. You can catch the full nightly shows live or view the backlog of episodes for free on our Rumble page. You can also find full episodes the morning after they air across all major podcasting platforms, including Spotify and Apple. All the information you need is linked below. We hope to see you there.